طيب بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين صلى الله وسلم وبارك على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين أما بعد. So today we're going to continue with the first rule, or the first qaida, the first maxim from Imam Saajid's book, rahimahullah. We started, the second maxim, the second rule. We said last week the maxim is a rule. It's a rule or principle. We're going to use the term rule to make it clear and uniform. And last week we did the first rule and the second rule. The second rule we started, but he said under the second rule there are 3 rules under the second rule. As it says, maxim 2 is comprised of 3 sub-maxims. There are 3 rules that go under the second rule. So the first one we did was necessities legalize prohibitions. Al-Darurat tubih al-Mahdurat. Necessities legalize prohibitions. And we got up to page 17 if you have the book. If you have the book, we got to page 17, the last paragraph, because we're at the end of this rule here. So the section where it says there are innumerable scenarios in which this maxim applies. Number 1, the rule is, in short, summary, when there's a dire need for something, the thing that has been made that is usually haram becomes halal for that person in that situation. One of the examples he used was eating pork for a Muslim. For Muslims, we're not allowed to eat pork, haram to eat pork. But if a person is in a dire necessity, a situation where if they don't eat the pork, that it could cost them their life, they could starve to death. In that case, can the Muslim eat pork in that case? Even though pork is haram, is not allowed for Muslims? In that case, then the Muslim can eat the pork. Now, the next issue that we discussed was how much pork, just like that. How much pork should the person eat? Enough to sustain life. Diet. We didn't get into the details of that last week. But here is a nice benefit. How much should the person eat? And it says that the scholars differ. The scholars differ on the person who is forced to eat pork, right? Is that person allowed to just eat until they're full, or do they just eat enough to keep their life? Okay. We discussed last week that they eat enough to sustain life, and we didn't mention the other side. And he basically mentions that there are 2 positions according to the scholars. That some say, like Imam Abu Hanifa, rahimahullah, he says, that a person is not allowed to eat until they're full. And a person just keep eating until they're full from the pork, right? He says, and this is also the position of Imam Nawawi, also Ibn Qudamah, rahimahullah. And they say why? It says, why do they say you're not allowed to eat until you're full? You might want to take a guess. Number 1, what allows us to eat the pork? The condition, the necessity of condition, or the condition of the necessity. So they say that the verse shows that we're not allowed to eat, for example, pork or meta, the carcass, roadkill. The exception was stathna. The exception is when a person is forced out of necessity. That's the only time you're allowed to eat it, right? When they're in a dire situation of necessity. They says, so if a person so once a person has removed the necessity, meaning they know they ate enough to keep them alive, at that point, the pork goes back to being haram. You can't keep eating from it. Clear? Once a person ate enough to keep themselves alive, then it goes back. The original rule goes back to eating the pork, which is that it is not allowed. Tayyib. The other scholars say that it's allowed for that person to fill up on the pork, if we say. And he says that this is some of the scholars of the Shafi'i madhab and the Hanbali madhab, and they say that the meaning of fill up is a laysan ma'na shaba an yamtali hatta la yajid ta'am masalan. It's not that a person fills up, as we say, to get full, not like that. When they say a person can keep eating from it, not like we understand you keep eating until you're full. I'm done, I can't eat no more. They say it doesn't mean that. They says lakin idan kasrat surat al-jur. But they said they keep eating until they remove the hunger, the feel of being hungry, right? There's a difference between eating until you're stuffed and eating until you're not hungry anymore. Everybody see the level? So they broke it down in the level. So they said you don't have to eat just a little bit just to keep yourself alive. No, they say you can eat until you remove the feeling of hunger. And that doesn't necessarily mean that a person just kept eating until they were stuffed, as we say. After that, we stop on the examples of when it is allowed to, as we say, break the original rule, when something is haram. And in this book, you need to understand, when they bring the examples in that section, that means that without going into detail, it's already established that it's not allowed to do. And that's why it's the point of mentioning. So with the examples mentioned here, they're mentioned here because it's not allowed to do these things. But if it's a situation of necessity, in that case, now it's allowed to do these things based on this rule. Everybody clear? So for example, on page 17, it says, drinking impure water and other things, right? Drinking impure water. For example, a person is stranded in the woods. They go on a ski trip or they go on a camping trip, right? And they get lost. They get lost from the group. They lost for 2-3 days. And the person feels like they don't have anything to drink except for what? Maybe urine. Or they had some water, but urine fell in it. At that point, is it allowed to drink water with urine in it? Yeah. Originally. The origin is that it's not allowed to drink. We're not allowed to drink. You drink water with urine in it. That's the also. But in this case, based on the necessity, a person can drink it for what? What's the point of drinking the water? To survive, sustain life. And we're not going to go past that. How much water should they drink? We just said. Some say you drink until you just to survive, and some say you drink enough until you remove the need of drinking water. So the examples like that mentioned here, they're mentioned there because it's already established in the books of fiqh that these are haram, right? The principle is that necessity legalizes the prohibition. So things that were haram. It says also, another example, multiple and consecutive movements in prayer. What is the ruling on multiple movements in the prayer? And they're consecutive. A person keeps moving throughout the salat. They say Allahu Akbar, and once they start praying, they start fiddling with their throat, they're moving around, they never stop moving through the whole rakat. What does that do to the salat? Huh? No doubt it breaks the for sure. But what did it do to the salat also? It invalidates it. And that's why it's mentioned here. It's mentioned here because too much movement in the salat, consecutive. That's why it says multiple consecutive movement, not just a movement here and there. No, a person keeps fiddling. Keeps fiddling and fidgeting with their sock, they're fiddling with their shirt, they touching stuff that has nothing to do with the salat. And they keep doing it, that will break the salat. Tell you, what if a person has a reason for fiddling? They have a necessity. It's a necessity for movement. If the necessity is there for that type of movement, then it doesn't break the salat. Clear? That's why the example is mentioned there. Some of the examples need a lot of detail, a lot of description. So some of them we don't have to read, but we want to read the ones that are clear, inshallah. One of the sisters asked about this example last week. Likewise, it says, whoever is compelled to take the wealth of another, such as in the form of food or otherwise. Now the question is, what is the hukm Islamically? Are we allowed to take other people's wealth? Can we take other people's belongings and property without asking them? No, it's haram, right? Yes. Not allowed. The origin, right? We can't just take people's property without their permission. That's the asl. But what if there's a necessity of what, like the example he gives? It says, for example, as in the form of food. A person is starving and you left your cheese steak on the table and they walk by, right? And they don't ask you, they just take a half, right? Or you ate a half. Let's say you ate a half of the steak and you left the other half on the table. So they figure he already ate a half, he should be good, right? I'm gonna just take this other half and right? And they feel like if they don't take it, right, they ain't eating 3 days maybe. Person hasn't eaten in 3 days. So they do what? They take the other steak. They take the other half of the steak. Is it allowed for them to take the steak in their situation? In their situation, based on the necessity for them, that doesn't mean everybody that walks through the door has the right to take the steak. Clear? So these rules are not black and white for everybody. It's going to vary from person to person, situation to situation. Tayyib. He says, it is permissible to take it without the permission or the agreement of the owner. And then it gives the exception. Even in that case, you can't just take a person's things. And that's why I said half a steak. Let's say, for example, the steak belonged to a person who was in the same situation as them. Neither one of them ate in 3 days. And both of them are trying to sustain life. But one person owns the steak and the other person doesn't own the steak. In that case, they can't come and take it because that's going to affect the other person's life being sustained. Clear? And that's why the exception is, except in the case when it will harm the owner. If you taking that half a steak is going to cause the owner to starve to death, then it's not permissible to take the steak. Clear? If you taking somebody's stuff is going to cause the other person to be in the same situation that you're trying to avoid, then you're not allowed to take the steak. So for example, the person is trying not to starve to death. That's what they're trying to do. So what they say? They say, all right, I'm gonna take this steak so I don't starve to death. But what if you taking that steak, right? Or whatever type of food it is, or the water so you don't, right? What if you taking that is gonna cause the owner of that food to starve to death? And in that case, it's not allowed to take that food or whatever it is that a person. He said, this is because something harmful cannot be removed by another thing which is harmful. Because you're trying to save yourself, don't mean that you can push the harm off on somebody else. Clear? Yes.
It's taking something that's owed to you without asking the owner of that thing. Does that fall into the same category? This example, like somebody owe you $20,
Right.
And you see $20 is there sitting on the table, and they duck you.
And they ducking you. It's getting sticky, man. The more you talk, the stickier it's getting. They ducking you. They got the ability to pay you. They have the ability to pay you. That's not this. That's not this. That's something else. That's not this though. This is the person, right, is in a darura. They fall under that category of the title. They're in a state of necessity. So they're taking something, right? In a state of necessity. So all of this has to be kept in context. This is a person's in a state of necessity, and I don't have anything to help me to keep me living. So only thing I see is what a person has. That's the owner. They're okay. I might have just sat there and watched them eat half of it. So I know they're not starving. I walk up and I take the other half of their sandwich in order to keep my life alive, right? What if it's two people and sometimes they might know each other? They know they both haven't eaten and they see that the other person got to some food before they did, right? They both haven't eaten in 3 days. And then they see the other person, you're not allowed to go take their food and push the harm of starvation off on the other person. And this is why he says on page 18 that the fuqaha have a statement they often say that there is no prohibition in the event of necessity. When there's a necessity, the things that are usually prohibited, that are usually haram, are no longer haram when in the state of necessity. And that's, of course, it's not black and white. It's based on situation. This is situational. That what? There's no prohibition in the event of necessity, and there's no obligation in the absence of capability. I gotta move this because I can't see the shit. طيب. Two principles. If something is haram, but a person is forced into the situation out of necessity, whatever was haram becomes halal for that person in that situation for that period of time. Once they're out of the state of necessity, it goes back to being haram. And the scholars also say, the obligation of something is removed. It's no longer obligatory if you don't have the ability to do it. So for example, what's the hukum, what's the Islamic ruling on standing up to pray Salatul Dhuhr? Do we have to stand or is it optional to stand? You have to stand, right? It's not optional. For the 5 daily prayers, it's not optional if you're going to stand, if you're going to sit. But if a person doesn't have the ability to stand, in that case, that obligation of standing is removed from them, not from all of the Muslims in the world, from that person in that situation. طيب, and that person in that situation. طيب. The next rule, which is related to the same idea. It carries the same idea, but it's less on a lower level. The highest level is that something was haram, right? Let me ask you a question before we go any further. What does haram mean in Islam? If we say something is haram in Islam, what does that mean? Prohibited is the translation of the word haram, prohibited. If you say to a person, that's prohibited, Akhi, what does that mean? Like, what does that carry for us as Muslims? What does that mean? You can't do it.
It's off limits by law and messenger.
It's off limits by law and his messenger. All of that's cool. There you are. If something is haram, right, that means, number one, it's a sin. It's a sin, number one. On top of that, it's punishable, that Allah could punish a person for doing it. You see, that's what it equals out to be Islamically. Islamically, that's a sin and it's punishable by Allah. Allah could forgive a person, but at that point, they're under the will of Allah, Tabaraka Ta'ala, right? So when we say stuff like, for example, we're not supposed to do it, that's haram, we can't do that. No, it carries it's a little heavier than that. That's sinful, right? That's a strike against us in our book, right? On top of that, it's punishable. تزيل المكروهات. طيب, this is important. Number one, a necessity is a higher level than a need. Okay, firstly, a necessity is a higher level than a need. A need is not as important as necessity. A need is not as important as a necessity. So a need, al-haja, ما تحتاجه الأمة والأفراد من حيث التوسعة والرفع الحرج. These are things that make life easier. A need makes life easier. Meaning if you don't have the things that you need, doesn't mean you're going to die. Like the darura, the necessity, the previous one. The previous one, a person, if they don't do it, they might die. Right? They might lose their life if they don't eat the pork. Right? That's a necessity. A need is a little less than that. Okay? A need, if a person doesn't do it, it's not going to take their life. It's not putting them in that much danger, but it's definitely going to make the situation uncomfortable. It's going to make the situation uncomfortable. So when something is a need, that means the thing that we were about to do is no longer disliked. Now we got to know what disliked is. Disliked is also, what does dislike mean Islamically? Islamically, What is dislike? Makruh. Yeah. What is it? What does it mean?
It's not punched. They detested.
Detested. Detested is another word for dislike. That's a translation, but what does it mean to us as Muslims every day? If something is disliked, what does that mean? Say that's disliked.
We shouldn't involve. We should like to abstain from it.
You should stay away from it.
Yes.
Tayyib. You should stay away from it. Like haram, you should stay away from.
Haram is not permissible.
It's not permissible.
Yes, not permissible. Totally forbidden.
It's totally forbidden.
Yes.
Tayyib, Jayyid. Further.
It's like it's no punishment. Negatively if you do it. Still disliked.
There's no punishment if you do it,
Right.
but you should still stay away from it. Right? So haram, you have to stay away from it totally, and it's a sin connected to it, and it's punishable. Disliked is also something that you should stay away from. But if a person did it, the thing that was disliked or detested or hated, all those are different words that's used, it's not punishable and it's not a sin. But a person should still stay away from it. Tayyib. Now we got two lower levels. The lower level of being haram is knocked down to disliked. So it's carrying that same idea as the previous one. In the haja, the need is a little less than the necessity. Tayyib. So it's the same idea. When you need something, whatever was hated becomes, I want to say unhated, but it's no longer hated. Tayyib. And they're going to give some examples. And this is on page 19 if you have the book. When there's a need to carry out a disliked matter, then it being disliked, makruh, is lifted. It's no longer disliked anymore. So let's give an example before we go. Let's move to the example and then come back. It gives some examples on page 20. Again, these examples are mentioned here because it's already established that these things are disliked to do. All right? The examples here are already established as disliked to do. That's why they're mentioned here. It says some scenarios when we use this principle, this rule. It says such as the types of water which are disliked to use. This is a question now. Now this is a question. What type of water is disliked to use to make wudu with?
Stagnant.
Huh?
Stagnant.
Stagnant water?
Like it doesn't flow. Like it's
Water that's standing still.
it's standing still.
Tayyib. Salt water. Tayyib. What else? Huh?
Something older.
Older or odor? Or the smell? Tayyib.
I mean, not no bad.
No. I'm thinking, Sheikh. I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm just thinking. I want to use a clear, because I don't want to use an example that I got to really go to a heavy explanation on why it's going to go to further.
Extremely cold or extremely hot.
Extremely cold or extremely hot. All right. Why is it disliked to use hot water? Extremely hot water. Why?
You might harm yourself.
Huh?
You might harm yourself.
You could hurt yourself, or
I'm sorry. It is Professor Law.
oh, before you go there, why is it disliked to use very hot water or very cold water when making wudu, y'all? We're talking about we making wudu, and it's disliked to use a very hot water.
Islam forbids us to harm ourselves.
Tayyib. What else? Because what? It may cause you to rush through the wudu and you don't perfect the wudu. Why? Because the water is too hot. So they say, is it haram to use very hot water to make wudu? It's not haram. If you made wudu with very hot water and you finish the whole wudu, it'd be correct. The wudu is solid, you can pray. But they say it's disliked. Why? Because that brings on, you open yourself up to rush through the wudu because the water's so hot, and then you might end up missing something. You don't perfect it the way it's supposed to be perfected. So in that case, right, it's disliked to you make wudu or also with hot water. Tayyib, a person is in a situation where it's a need. There's no other water around except for this hot water. They're in a place, there's no other water around. Is the water running? It's running water. The cold water's not working though. Or vice versa. Only the cold water is working in the winter and the hot water is not working, right? So is it a need to use hot water? It's a need to use it. But hot water, using hot water for wudu, what's the ruling? Is usually hated. It's disliked to do it. Is it still hated for the person who's in this situation? No, it's not hated for the person in that situation. Clear? And that's what the rule means here on page 19. Needs eliminate dislikes. It's a need for it, so it's no longer disliked. Clear? Fadl Sheikh.
Yeah, when you was asking about what are the water,
Mm.
like it's like, when I want to say based on the idea that said the water that the taste, if the taste change
There you
or
go.
the color change
Mm.
or it smells
Right.
change. So those are
So hey, there's a lot of examples that it can be used for. I use the hot water because I don't want to make it into another class, because now we got to go into why, what type of water is this like, even though he mentioned a couple examples here. Here's another example. It says water. It says used. It's mentioned here because it's disliked to use this type of water. Used water for a recommendable act of purification. That's what it says in English. It says used water for a recommendable act of purification. Now, does anybody know what that means? The meaning of that sentence?
Use water.
Used water. Water has You said, why would the wudu come under?
Need or necessity when you just use the earth instead of using dirty water.
It's not dirty.
To use this impure water, secondhand, use the water.
It's not impure. If it was impure, it'd be haram to use it. They say it's disliked.
Of a need when you can just use the sand instead.
Number one, pay attention, pay attention. Number one, it's not a need because I have wudu already. So I don't have to make wudu. All right? But if I want to make wudu, so recommend I want to make wudu. Okay, when do I use tayammum? Tayammum is used when there's no water. Is it water
So
available?
you're saying that it's still preferred to use the used water over them.
Jayid. Because now you're going to get into when can we make tayammum? When can we make dry wudu with the dirt and the sand and with the dirt? When there's no water available. So is there water available?
Yes.
Is water available? Is that the preferred water that we would prefer to use?
But now if the water was impure, because now this is haram, so now the tayammum will come above using impure water. If the water was impure through urine or whatever else. Because you can't say that it's a necessity now because you have another option.
Right. Now let's go back. Whenever we do, y'all, whatever we do, we got to go back to remembering what is a necessity and what is a need. A necessity, if I don't use it, is going to cause me some serious harm, maybe loss of life. Right? Maybe loss of life. Is it a necessity for me to use that water over tayammum? May not be. Is it a necessity in that case? Would that be necessity like that? That's not on the same level as a person losing life because of starvation. You see what I'm saying? And that's why these rules are not blanket, just use them. You have to really be conscious and understand we're still responsible before Allah. Right? If you say it's a need, if a person say they're in the state of necessity, that's their call. That's on them yawm al-qiyamah. You with me? In order for you to take something that's haram and make it halal, you say, I was in a state of necessity. Okay, that's on you. Does Islam allow it? Yes, if a person is really in a situation, Islam allows that. Were you in that situation? Was I in that situation? Allahu A'lam. That's between you and Allah. And that's how we got to carry all of these. Because these are, if we can say, these qawaid give us a pass. They give us a pass for a specific amount of time to do something specific. Right? So it's not for us to go overboard and think that we're going to like get over on somebody. It all comes back to us. It's on our slate, yawm al-qiyamah. Right? So it may not be a necessity, depending on the situation. Depends on the situation.
What was his example again? What was the example, brother? What was the example?
I was just asking about using the tayammum, doing that, performing that over impure water. Yeah.
Najis, man, najis.
It's in the impure water made it. If there's a necessity, you can use it. But
Right. If it's a necessity in impure water, right? So you got water, let's just be clear. You got water with urine in it. It's time to pray, and there's water. The only water you have is water with urine. In that case, do you have water?
Yes.
No.
No, you don't. No.
Why? Because there's urine in the water. So in that case, you make tayammum.
The only thing I was gonna add is like only way you can use not just water like that situation is like you can't make tayammum.
Now that's different. Now, if you can't make tayammum, that's you understand what I'm saying? So it can keep changing based on the situation. Tayyib. Allahu Akbar. Allahu Akbar. Tayyib. The next one, it says with thalatha, page 21. And this third one is also connected to the previous two. Right? All of these are under the second principle. It says ad-darura tuqaddaru biqadriha. A necessity is measured by its extent. And we kind of already did this. Within the other two. And basically, what is it? A person, well, let's look at the wording and see how we understand it. It says, when a prohibition is legalized due to a necessity, it is not absolutely legitimate. I'd like to know what you understand from that. If a person, it says, when a prohibition is legalized due to a necessity, it is not absolutely legitimate, but rather it is bound by the extent of its necessity. Fadlan.
Just like when you travel to a land where there is no other beef, but what they have is like pork, for example.
Okay.
So then, based on Sharia, based on the principle, you just have to take something that will suffice you, because that is what we call necessity. But you can't be so comfortable and just be eating the pork because you are hiding under the principle of necessity.
Right.
So that is the
Clear.
principle.
It goes back to the previous principle. The same idea that the scholars differ on. How much of the pork do you eat? Enough just to sustain life, right? Now they differ on, well, what does that mean? Enough to just survive or enough to remove the hunger? That's a different category of the same idea. Clear? So this one carries the same meaning. Necessity is measured by its extent. That a person, that prohibition is based on, or when it becomes allowed, the haram that becomes allowed, eating the pork, stealing somebody's food or something like that. What's allowed is allowed to do what you need to survive, to remove yourself out of the state of necessity. Not that it's just open season now. I can start taking people's water when I see them leaving their trunk open. Right? Yeah. You can't play with Dean. This is not a in the middle of the page, it says this applies to the carrion being legalized, which is the roadkill. Remember last week we used the example about if the goat or the lamb falls off the truck and gets hit by a car and it dies, that's roadkill. It's meta. That the Muslim is not allowed to take that and go barbecue it, right? Because it's meta, it wasn't slaughtered. He says here, this applies to that type of food, the carrion being legalized, even though a person could eat that due to necessity. If that was the only thing the person thought they were going to die, can they eat the roadkill? They can eat the roadkill. It says it may be eaten according to the amount it takes to stay alive. Not that we just go, as we say, go ham on it, right? We should say turkey ham, maybe. Allah understand. But yeah. It says also, and again, these issues are mentioned in these areas because it's already established in the books of fiqh. There's a person who has a sickness, right? And that sickness causes discharge, meaning they're constantly throughout the day. It could be a man or a woman. They constantly have discharge, urine, discharge all day long, right? So meaning even while they're making wudu for the salat, they have discharge. And what happens if urine comes out while you're making wudu? That breaks your wudu. You gotta make wudu again. But this is a sickness that a person has. So even while they're making wudu, they're having discharge. They finish the wudu, it leaks again, discharge again, discharge again. In this case, how does this person make wudu? The early man said that they make wudu when it's time to pray. So for example, we're gonna pray Maghrib inshallah at 8:30. You might make wudu when you leave your house at 6 o'clock, right? And then you can still pray with that wudu when you pray Maghrib at 8:30, as long as you didn't break your wudu. But they say for these people that they shouldn't do that. That they should make wudu right when they're gonna pray. Right? That's the closest. They should make wudu right when they're gonna pray. Right? And this keeps them, even though it's gonna break the wudu because they have that sickness. They say that they don't use their whole time. They don't say, well, I'm just gonna break anyway. They don't just take the, I don't say take the Brody, but they don't just go and just do whatever and just say, I'm gonna make wudu at 6 o'clock even though by the time I get to the masjid or the time my mother come, my wudu gonna be broken 3 times. But I'm gonna just do it anyway now. They say no. They should wait. They should wait till the time of the salat gets closer, make the wudu then, and then pray like that. And that's the example where it says the purification of one who is perpetually in a state of impurity. They are bound by time due to them being forms of purification due to necessity. That necessity, the wudu that the person is making that constantly has that discharge, is necessity. It's going to break. So what do? They make it again. What they going to keep do? Keep making wudu like all day long? That's going to be a hardship. So what do? They wait until the time is closer. They're going to pray, and then they make the wudu. And in that case, they pray like that. In that case, they pray like that. It's an exception. They don't have any other choice. They can't just keep standing and making wudu if you bring it there all day. So in that case, they pray like that. And this one is important. It says, likewise, compulsion in divorce. What does that mean? Compulsion in divorce. Huh?
When they compel, like somebody compelled them to do it.
What does that mean?
Forced.
A man is forced. Somebody forces a man to divorce his wife. Somebody forces a man to divorce his wife. Tayyib, what does that look like?
Somebody came there, like, we don't leave out, we're going to kill you.
Yeah. A person says, for example, if you don't divorce her, I'm going to kill you. If you don't divorce her, I'm going to kill you. Does he intend to divorce his wife?
No.
Is it allowed for the man to divorce his wife right then and there in order to sustain his life not being killed?
Yes.
Yes, he can do that. And it doesn't count as a divorce. Clear? You don't have to show your love for it that much, I think. Allahu Akbar. Likewise, the opposite for the woman too. If somebody was to do that to the woman and say, ask him for a khulaq. Now, and they force him, it's a forced situation. And he's there and give it to her. Right? And he gives it to her. If they're forced, it doesn't count. Clear? And that's why it says compulsion, meaning to be forced into divorce, whether it's coming from the man or the khulaq. A woman is forced to ask for a khulaq coming from the woman. In either case, are they allowed to do those things to sustain life? They can do that to sustain life, and it doesn't count against them. Just like the person who ate the pork, right? They ate pork. It doesn't count against them as a sin based on the necessity, Like in this case, the person is forced. This doesn't count, though. Pay attention. The divorce doesn't count in that case.
But what about if the rulers enforce somebody to do that?
If the who?
The ruler, like the Muslim rulers, enforce somebody that they're going to do, maybe you saw the way he's maltreating the lady, or he enforce him to divorce the lady.
That's a different situation. That's a court ruling.
Okay.
If that's a court, well, we're not talking about a court ruling in court, because that could happen. It could happen Islamically, y'all. And this is important. Islamically, because sometimes, I'm going to tell you a lot of times, based on not my experience of people who come, sisters with complaints. Sometimes brothers think they can lock women in marriages. Like, I'm just not going to divorce you. Number one, he out of pocket. He's not behaving like a Muslim, and she doesn't want to be married to him. She wants to be a Muslim and practice Islam. And some men think it don't matter what you say or who you ask, I'm not divorcing you and I'm not giving you a khulaq. As if Islam allows that. And Islam doesn't allow that. All right? But in that case, it's possible in a Muslim country, they go to court. And whether the man agrees or not, he can be forced to divorce his wife. In the court system, he can be forced to divorce his wife. It's not that Islam allows, and even if we wasn't in a court, an Islamic court, there's a thing called fasq nikah. And that's important for brothers and sisters to learn the rules of separating in Islam, because sometimes we have a lot of issues where women could leave Islam thinking that Islam allows oppression, thinking that Islam allows men to just put their foot on a woman's neck. And Islam doesn't allow that. The problem is we don't have enough knowledge to combat what a person's doing. And then people end up taking it. They just end up going with the flow.
For this, I'm sorry to the class. For this type of situation, because based on my experience, I've experienced this that the men are abusing the woman.
Right.
Even though the women have tried to even file what they call it from the police restriction, but the men still hide under the Sharia. And these men are very abusive and they commit a lot of munkar.
Right.
So, but in this this type of society, and we have a brother involved and a sister, what would be the ruling now? How would we go about this situation?
That is off topic. It
I know
can be
that's why I
dealt
say
with,
sorry for the digression,
but
it's very,
that's
very serious
important
thing.
for the people who marry them, the masajid, and the brothers and sisters who get married need to know that Islam's separation in Islam is not restricted to divorce and khula. That's not the only two ways that couples separate. Couples can be forced to separate, whether the man agrees or not. Islamically, whether the sister agrees or not, couples can be forced to separate. And that's a whole process. It's not a one-day thing. It's not a pop-up. I'm done. It's not that kind of thing. It's a process where a lot of people will be involved to make sure everything is what it's supposed to be Islamically. And that's called fasakh nikah, which is annulment of the marriage contract, which means basically you two are not married from this day forward. And that is something that's not easy, and it's not for everybody to
In
do.
a non-Muslim society,
In a non-Muslim society, it's not easy. It can be done, but it's not easy. And it has to be done with hikmah, with wisdom. Inshallah. Inshallah. Tahir. He says, so back to the issue. The man was forced to divorce his wife. It doesn't count, right? Or she was forced to single khula, and he gave it to her. If they were forced, it doesn't count. But what if he was forced to divorce? Let's just say the man has, and this he says, but if he does any of the above without being compelled, then it is correctly applicable, as he was not forced. For example, if one is forced to utter, he's forced to divorce his wife, right? But he divorces her 3 times. They say, divorce your wife. How many times did he have to say she was divorced? He only had to say it once. That's what he was forced to do. He says it twice or 3 times. Then those extra ones count because he wasn't forced to do that. Clear? What doesn't count is what he was forced to do. Clear? And that's the last one on the bottom of page 21. If one is compelled to utter a single pronouncement of divorce, but then he utters it more than once. So in reality, the first time he said his wife was divorced, it didn't count because it was forced. But then he divorced her 2 more times after that. Those other 2 did count because he wasn't forced to do that. Clear? Anything above what you're forced to do counts. Anything above what you're forced to do counts. The next example, one is forced to divorce his wife, Hind. Her name is Hind, or whatever your wife's name is. He's forced to divorce. He got more than one wife, y'all. He's practicing the sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. What's the hukum Islamically on marrying more than one wife?
it's sunnah.
Sunnah. Jayy. Khalas, let's leave it there. It's recommended, brothers, to marry more than one wife. Alhamdulillah. The brother has more than one wife, and he's forced in the same situation to divorce his wife, and he used the example here, Hind, or whatever her name is. Right? It says, but he divorces his second wife, Fatima, instead. Was he forced to divorce Fatima? No. So that counts because he did that on his own. But if somebody forced him to divorce, as it says, Hind, that's her name, for example. Her name is Hind. He was forced to divorce Hind, and he divorced Hind. Does that divorce count? No. Why doesn't it count? He was forced. That divorce doesn't count. Again, he was forced to divorce Hind. He didn't divorce his wife Hind. He divorced his other wife, Fatima. Does that count? Yes, it does. Why does it count? He wasn't forced to divorce Fatima. He was forced to divorce Hind. Clear? Huh? Yes, right? That's why you got to be careful. And divorce is very delicate. So we got to be, right? Don't think that you can divorce this one because it was a problem. Didn't say I was forced. No. You were forced to divorce this one. And you chose to divorce Fatima. Right? So that one would count. Tayyib. And he brings another 2 examples. They both hold the same meaning. One is dealing with slaves. One is dealing with the selling of a house. Or it says one is compelled to admit the amount of a dirham, but he admits to a dinar. It's the same idea. Whatever you're forced to do, that's what you're not held accountable for. But if you choose to do something else in the mix of that, then it counts. And it counts. Clear says one is compelled, one is forced to sell his house. If you don't sell me this house, I'm going to do such and such to you. You got a gun to say such and such, you better sign right here. right? But instead, it says he sells his slave instead, right? Or you could switch slave and say he signed to sell over his car instead. We won't have slaves. We got cars. He was forced to sell his house, but he didn't do that, and he sold his car. Him selling the car, is it finished? That's a final sell? That's a final sell. Why? He wasn't forced to do that, right? He wasn't forced to do that. So again, anything that's forced in this situation, if it's forced, it doesn't count. It's not held against the person. And if they choose to do it, then it is held against the person. Questions? Fadal.
If it's like Muslims, right? It's a situation with property or something like that. And maybe it's a disagreement with the property because for whatever reason, they didn't agree upon something. Can the Muslims force another group of Muslims out of the property?
Say that again?
Like you have two groups of Muslims.
Two groups of Muslims.
They was one time together.
They were together at
They
once.
arguing over a property.
They're arguing over property.
One is dominant.
One group is dominant over the other. They're a little stronger. They got more leverage
So they
on the other.
push the other one out of the property.
Based on what? They force them out. They force the other group out of the property.
Yeah.
Based on what?
Based on what they feel, which is correct.
Misunderstanding?
Huh?
Misunderstanding.
Misunderstanding.
That depends. A lot. I need a lot more information for that. They own the property together. One group owns the property. They share on the property. Huh?
But the people that was pushed out own the property.
The people that are pushed out own the property.
But they was forced to get out of the property.
Allah, I need more. I would need a whole lot more information.
All right, that's all.
Allah. Tayyib. The issue of, okay, that was the third rule connected to the three. For the second, again, for the second rule, they said it was three under the second rule, right? The first one was necessities legalize prohibitions. Ad-darurat tubihu al-mahdhurat. When it comes to that, and we already discussed this, somebody asked the question last week that back to the pork. But it's not just pork, y'all, or liquor, wine. There's nothing else to drink, right? Some alcohol. Alcohol is the only thing available to drink. It might kill them. They drink it. Let's use the pork as easy, inshallah. It's clear. Just to be clear on the. But that's the issue, drinking alcohol. But let's use this a little clearer. Now we already know if we're in that dire necessity, that situation. Pork is only. We know we're allowed to eat it, right? We're allowed to eat it. But one of the sisters asked last week, do we have to eat it? We're allowed to eat it in order to do what? Sustain life. So what happens if I don't eat it? The only thing left is pork there, and I choose not to eat it. Then what happens to me? I die. Are we allowed to do that?
No.
Huh?
No.
Inshallah.
We debated this just last week.
We did?
Yeah, I brought that question up.
That was you?
Yeah, about the would you be sinful to God?
Mm.
If you don't eat
Jade.
pork? Yeah.
Would you be sinful for not eating the pork? Meaning, is it haram for you not to eat the pork in that point?
Yes.
Like some say, and the scholars differ on two opinions. Some say yes, you have to eat it. Yajin, obligatory to eat it.
So don't kill yourself.
Right.
You have to cause it.
Based on that ayah. You with me?
No.
Like, so some say, they say yajin, obligatory for the person. Make sure we understand what's going on. We already know, we clear on, we're allowed to eat the pork. We're in a state of necessity. If there's the only thing, I'm going to starve to death, the only thing that's left to eat is pork. Is a Muslim allowed to do that at that point? They're allowed to, yes. Now the question is, does the Muslim have to eat it at that point? That's where we at now. Do they have to? Not if we're allowed to. Do they have to? The first position of the scholars is that it is obligatory, yajib. They have to. It's obligatory to eat the pork in that case. Now the question is, y'all, we need to know what obligatory means. What does obligatory mean Islamically? Wajib means what?
Wajib is
Obligation.
obligation.
Obligation, compulsory, or translations?
You want to
Yes, Islamically, what does it mean in the life of a Muslim if something is wajib?
Don't do yourself on your.
You
It's the
need to
wrath
be
of Allah.
punished.
There you are. If you don't do the obligation, it's a sin, and for you not doing the obligation is punishable by Allah Jalla wa Ala, right? So the 5 daily prayers are obligations. So if a person don't pray 5 times a day, a Muslim that doesn't pray 5 times a day, that's sinful and it's punishable. Are you clear? So now we're in the case where a person is in a situation, the only thing left to eat is the pork. Some of the ulama say it is obligatory for them to eat that pork. And that means if they don't eat it, in that case, then they're sinful. What happens if they don't eat the pork? They die, they starve to death. Right? So they say, yajib, it's obligatory for the person to eat the pork based on the ayat in Surah An-Nisa. If you want to take this down, Surah An-Nisa, ayat 29. Allah said, وَلَا تَقْتُلُوا أَنفُسَكُمْ. Don't kill yourselves. And Allah kana bikum rahiman. Allah is merciful with you. So Allah gives the order not to kill yourself. So they say if a person doesn't eat it, then what? They've killed themselves. Also, the verse in Surah Al-Baqarah, ayat 195 in Surah Al-Baqarah. Allah said, وَلَا تُلْقُوا بِأَيْدِيكُمْ إِلَى تَهْلُكَ. And do not destroy yourself with your own hands. You had the option to eat something that will keep you alive, and you made a decision not to eat it. Right? They say based on these verses that a person, in this case, tark al-akl ma imkanihi fi hadhihi al-hal. He said that a person chose not to eat in this situation when they had the ability to eat something. You had the ability to eat something to keep your life. You chose and you made a decision. If they're going to compare it to kill yourself by not eating, right? They say, in this case, this is ilqa biyadihi ila tahluka. This is considered destroying yourself, putting yourself in a situation where you're going to cause harm to yourself. And for that reason, they say, if you were to eat it, you had the ability to eat it, and you chose not to. They say, in that situation, this is sinful. This is one group of scholars that say what? Not that you're just allowed, you have to eat it in that case. Tayyib. This is the position of the method of Imam Abu Hanifa, and some of the Malikiya, and some of the Shafi'iyya, and some of the Hanabila. It's not like a one-sided thing, right? Some of the Shafi'iyya and some of the Hanabila also hold that position. The second position is, do we have to eat that at that point? They say, la. They say it's not obligatory to eat it. Why? They say because a person not eating it, why would you think they say it's not obligatory to eat the pork in that case?
Because it's a choice.
It's a choice.
Yeah.
To live or die?
Based on their opinion.
The person don't know none of that. All they know is this pork right here, and they say what?
They don't say, well, you don't know the future. You don't know if there's going to be some mac and cheese in 5 minutes.
It probably ain't gonna be, but let's just say, for example, if you stuck, right? Let's say the Muslim is gonna say what initially to that food?
No.
Why? It's haram. It's haram, right? And they say that a person is not obligated to eat that pork in that case because they have a goal, and the goal is to what? Stay away from the haram. That's the goal of the person not eating. I'm not trying to kill myself by not eating it, but my goal is to stay away from the haram. So they say he has a gharad, he has a goal and staying away from it. وَهُوَ أَنْ يَجْتَنِبْ مَا حَرَّمَ اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِ. His goal is to stay away from what Allah made haram on him. So that person, they don't stay away from eating the pork based on, I'm gonna just kill myself and just die out here. They're staying away from the pork. The intent behind them not eating the pork in that case is to stay away from what Allah made haram. That's haram. Allah said that's haram, and I'm staying away from it, right? And that's why the other scholars hold the view that it's not obligatory. He says, وَهُوَ الْوَجْهُ الثَّانِي عِنْدَ الشَّافِعِيِّ وَالْحَنَابِلَةِ. And this is the second opinion that's found in the madhab of Imam Shafi'i and the madhab of Imam Ahmed rahimahullah. The author says here, this is tarjih. What time is it? Oh, we ready to stop. Tarjih. The author, you know how people say, well, what's the strongest opinion? Right? The strongest opinion, huh? What's the strong?
The first one.
The senior scholars.
MashaAllah.
The first one.
The first one.
Yes.
The strongest opinion, in every case, the strongest opinion is based on
Quran or Sunnah.
the nadhr. The nadhr is the sheikh sitting there doing the research. It doesn't matter what his name is or what country he's from or none of that. The strongest opinion is what the scholar sees the strongest opinion is in this issue. And that's why if your person say the strongest opinion, if I sat here and say to you, the strongest opinion is that you have to eat it. That's in my opinion, based on the research I did, the research that I came up with, the scholars that I heard say such and such. You might read a bunch of stuff and say the strongest opinion is the opposite of what I said. The strongest opinion is based on the knowledge, the person looking at the issue and studying and researching the issue. Everybody clear? Here it says a tarajih. The author here makes his tarajih, the strongest opinion to him, the author. That doesn't mean that everybody, all the rest of the scholars agree with this, right? But all of the scholars are between how many opinions? 2. Either it's obligatory or it's not obligatory. Who says it's obligatory? They go with that. And who says it's not? They go with that. According to the author here, it says a rajih al-wujub. The strongest opinion here is that it's obligatory to eat the pork in that case. And then he brings some statements from some of the other scholars like Al-Hafidh ibn Hajar rahimahullah. Al-Hafidh ibn Hajar rahimahullah, he said, Ma ubihu lid-darura la yusamma waqt at-tanawul muharraman. He said, whatever is allowed at the time of necessity, that's not called haram. So the pork, eating pork at the time when there's nothing else to eat, and if I don't eat, I'm going to die, the pork in that case is not considered to be haram. So they say it's obligatory. Wallahu a'lam, we're not making tarajih. It's just to understand that if you hear somebody else say that you don't have to eat it, right? What we agree on is you can eat it. Do you have to eat it? The scholars differ. Some say it's obligatory and some say it's not. And we'll stop there, inshallah ta'ala, until next week, unless there's any questions, sisters. If there's no questions, we'll start next week on the third principle, which is on page 23. أحكام الوسائل كأحكام المقاصد. Allahu Akbar. Any questions?
So what happens to the mac and cheese?
Oh, if the mac and cheese shows up, and then the pork becomes what? Haram, mashallah. There you go. If you show up and there's some mac and cheese or somebody show up with some fish at the last minute, you can't just go digging on the pork. Or can you?
You finish the shit in your hand.
Let's just say nothing. For example, it's real life, real. Say, for example, the pork is cooked and ready to eat. I'm starving. Somebody comes with fish that's raw, not ready to eat. What do I do? Sabr. Hey, you might be able to wait. The brother next to you or the sister might not be able to wait.
Sushi.
But yeah, sushi. Lord, I'm gonna stop there, man.
Well, it was a rough situation like this. The Colombian soccer players who playing went down in the Amazon. They ate on each other.
What you mean?
This was like
8 people?
2009.
Teammates.
The Colombian soccer players,
Yeah,
they ate like 4 people.
It's like that. It looks a bit though.
They ain't had no food,
Hey.
no meat, nothing.
So
Is it allowed to eat people, y'all? Like dead people? Is it allowed Islamically to eat people?
was a lot.
It was allowed eating live people?
They kept
It's at all.
some of these.
Either way, whether they did or allowed, is it allowed to eat a human being?
No.
No, it's not allowed.
They got
Like,
that.
in necessity, right? And this is a necessity. Is the Muslim allowed to do something like that to sustain life?
No.
No, I mean,
Can't kill a person.
No.
No.
But you said
No,
you
if they
can't do
allowed,
it,
no,
you
my
can't
bad.
harm
No,
the person.
but it was dead. Not if they allow. You can't eat nobody alive. That's
That's selfishness.
We had a consensus, I guess. 'Cause
no, because that goes back to what he mentioned earlier. You can't
Harm
harm somebody else in order to save yourself. You can't do it. Islam doesn't allow us to harm another person in order to save me. Like my life is more precious than yours. Nah, Islam doesn't allow that. So in that case, we gotta bite the bullet. Right, everybody's life holds the same value. So if my life is in danger, I can't shove you in front of the bullet.
If they
Allah
died,
understand?
it's different.
And if a person died, if we all out there and a person died off before us, 3 people died before us and we out there starving, that's different. But to kill somebody or to set somebody else up to be killed so that we can eat them, that's sahih. That's set somebody up, that's murder. Right?
Just like because you love somebody, you donate like 2 of your kidney to the person. Without not something left. So that is not permissible.
You living, you mean?
Yeah.
Sahih, sah. You're not allowed to put yourself in harm's way trying to save somebody else. That's the opposite, but it works the same. Sometimes people die, or a person in your family needs a kidney. They need an organ. So you know how we talk. Man, I'll give anything for something. We talking heavy, right? So now a person that's close to you needs a kidney. May Allah protect us all. I mean, what's the permissibility? That's a whole conversation in itself. I ain't gonna go into that. But bottom line, let's just say a person can't afford to give a kidney, meaning that person giving a kidney, they might die themselves. You can't just give your kid, because that's your child and you love them. You can't just give away your organ and put yourself in harm's way to save another life. Islam doesn't allow that. In the same way, you can't take another life just to save yours. Allahu a'lam. Wa sallallahu wa sallam wa baraka ala nabiyyina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam.